who the hell elected you and put you in charge of what the media are allowed to report and what the American people are allowed to hear? And why do you persist in behaving as a Democratic super PAC, silencing views to the contrary of your political beliefs?
Let's give Mr. Dorsey a few seconds to answer that, and then we'll have to conclude this segment.
Well, we're not doing that, and this is why I opened this hearing with calls for more transparency. We realize we need to earn trust more.
Mr. Zuckerberg, my understanding is that the person that's in charge of election integrity and security at Facebook is a former Joe Biden staffer. Is there someone that's closely associated with President Trump who's in the same sort of election integrity role at Facebook? And how do you all respond to that argument that there isn't sufficient balance in terms of the political ideology or diversity in your companies? And how do you deal with the lack of sort of trust that creates among conservatives?
Let's see if we can have 3 brief answers there.
Senator, I think having balance is valuable, and we try to do that. I'm not aware of the example that you say of someone in charge of this process who worked for Biden in the past. So we can follow up on that if that's right.
Follow up on the record for the rest of this answer, please, Mr. Zuckerberg. Thank you.
In fact, I think the trend is clear that you almost always censor, meaning, and when I use the word censor here, I mean block content, fact check, or label content, or demonetize websites of conservative, Republican, or pro-life individuals or groups or companies contradicting your commercial promises. But I don't see this suppression of high-profile liberal commentators. So, for example, have you ever censored a Democratic senator? How about President Obama? How about a Democratic presidential candidate? How about Planned Parenthood or NARAL or Emily's List? So, Mr. Zuckerberg, Mr. Dorsey, and Mr. Pichais, can any of you, and let's go in that order, Zuckerberg, Dorsey, and then Pichais, can you name for me one high-profile person or entity from a liberal ideology who you have censored and what particular action you took?
Would you say that the political ideology of the employees of your company is, let's say 50-50, conservative versus liberal progressive, or do you think it's closer to 90% liberal, 10% conservative? We'll start with Mr. Dorsey.
As you mentioned, I don't know the makeup of our employees because it's not something we ask or focus on.
But just what do you think off the top of your head based on your chat rooms and kind of the people you talk to?
Not something I look for or look
at. Right. Okay, Mr. Pichais.
Senator, I don't know the exact number, but I would guess that our employee base skews left-leaning.
I want to focus my questioning on Mr. Dorsey and on Twitter. Because of the 3 players before us, I think Twitter's conduct has by far been the most egregious. Mr. Dorsey, does Twitter have the ability to influence elections?
No.
You don't believe Twitter has any ability to influence elections?
No, we are one part of a broad spectrum of communication channels that people have.
So you're testifying to this committee right now that Twitter, when it silences people, when it censors people, when it blocks political speech, that has no impact on elections?
People have choice of other communication channels with which...
Not if they don't hear information. If you don't think you have the power to influence elections, why do you block anything?
Well, we have policies that are focused on making sure that more voices on the platform are possible. We see a lot of abuse and harassment, which ends up silencing people and having them leave from the platform.
All right, Mr. Dorsey, I find your opening questions, your opening answers absurd on their face. Let's talk about the last 2 weeks in particular. As you know, I have long been concerned about Twitter's pattern of censoring and silencing individual Americans with whom Twitter disagrees. But 2 weeks ago, Twitter, and to a lesser extent Facebook, crossed a threshold that is fundamental in our country. 2 weeks ago, Twitter made the unilateral decision to censor the New York Post in a series of 2 blockbuster articles, both alleging evidence of corruption against Joe Biden. The first concerning Ukraine, the second concerning communist China. And Twitter made the decision, number one, to prevent users, any user, from sharing those stories. And number two, you went even further and blocked the New York Post from sharing on Twitter its own reporting. Why did Twitter make the decision to censor the New York Post?
We had a hack materials policy that we.
When was that policy adopted?
In 2018, I believe.
In 2018. Go ahead. What was the policy?
So the policy is around limiting the spread of materials that are hacked. We didn't want Twitter to be a distributor for hack materials. We found that the New York Post, because it showed the direct materials, screenshots of the direct materials, and it was unclear how those were attained, that it fell under this policy. Now,
so in your view, if it's unclear the source of a document, and in this instance, the New York Post documented what it said the source was, which it said it was a laptop owned by Hunter Biden that had been turned into a repair store. So they weren't hiding what they claimed to be the source. Is it your position that Twitter, when you can't tell the source, blocks press stories?
No, not at all. Our team made a fast decision. The enforcement action, however, of blocking URLs, both in tweets and in DM, in direct messages, we believe was incorrect. And we changed it.
Today, right now, the New York Post is still blocked from tweeting 2 weeks later.
Yes, they have to log into their account, which they can do at this minute, delete the original tweet, which fell under our original enforcement actions, and they can tweet the exact same material in the exact same article, and it would go through.
So, Mr. Dorsey, your ability is you have the power to force a media outlet. Let's be clear. The New York Post isn't just some random guy tweeting. The New York Post has the fourth highest circulation of any newspaper in America. The New York Post is over 200 years old. The New York Post was founded by Alexander Hamilton. And your position is that you can sit in Silicon Valley and demand of the media that you can tell them what stories they can publish, and you can tell the American people what reporting they can hear. Is that right?
No, this was every person, every account, every organization that signs up to Twitter agrees to a terms of service. Terms of service is
so media outlets must genuflect and obey your dictates if they wish to be able to communicate with readers. Is that right?
No, not at all. We recognized an error in this policy, and specifically the enforcement.
You're still blocking their posts. You're still blocking their posts. Right now, today, you're blocking their posts.
We're not blocking the post. Anyone can tweet.
Can the New York Post post on their Twitter account?
If they go into their account.
No is your answer to that. No, unless they genuflect and agree with your dictates. Let me ask you something. You claimed it was because of a hacked materials policy. I find that facially highly dubious and clearly employed in a deeply partial way. Did Twitter block the distribution of the New York Times' story a few weeks ago that purported to be based on copies of President Trump's tax returns?
We didn't find that a violation of our terms of service and this policy in particular, because it was reporting about the material. It wasn't distributing the material.
Okay, well, that's actually not true. They posted what they purported to be original source materials, and federal law, federal statute makes it a crime, a federal felony, to distribute someone's tax returns against their knowledge. So that material was based on something that was distributed in violation of federal law, and yet Twitter gleefully allowed people to circulate that. But when the article was critical of Joe Biden, Twitter engaged in rampant censorship and silencing.
And again, we recognized errors in that policy. We changed it within 24 hours. This is.
But you're still blocking the New York Post. You haven't changed it.
We have changed it. They can log into their account, delete the original tweet. That was.
You forced a Politico reporter to take down his post about the New York Post as well. Is that correct?
Within that 24-hour period, yes. But we, as the policy has changed, anyone can tweet.
So Twitter takes the view you can censor the New York Post, you can censor Politico, presumably you can censor the New York Times or any other media outlet. Mr. Dorsey, who the hell elected you and put you in charge of what the media are allowed to report and what the American people are allowed to hear? And why do you persist in behaving as a Democratic super PAC, silencing views to the contrary of your political beliefs?
Let's give Mr. Dorsey a few seconds to answer that, and then we'll have to conclude this segment.
Well, we're not doing that, and this is why I opened this hearing with calls for more transparency. We realize we need to earn trust more. We realize that more accountability is needed to show our intentions and to show the outcomes.
Thank you, Senator.
So I hear the concerns and acknowledge them, but we want to fix it with more transparency.
Thank you, Senator Cruz.
My Democrat colleagues suggest that when we criticize the bias against conservatives, that we're somehow working the refs. But the analogy of working the refs assumes that it's legitimate even to think of you as refs. It assumes that you three Silicon Valley CEOs get to decide what political speech gets amplified or suppressed, and it assumes that you're the arbiters of truth, or at the very least, the publishers making editorial decisions about speech. So yes or no, I would ask this of each of the three of you, are the Democrats correct that you all are the legitimate referees over our political speech? Mr. Zuckerberg, are you the ref?
Senator, I certainly think not, and I do not want us to have that role.
Mr. Dorsey, are you the ref?
No.
Mr. Pichais, are you the ref?
Senator, I do think we make content moderation decisions, but we are transparent about it, and we do it to protect users. But we really believe and support maximizing freedom of expression.
I'll take that as three no's, and I agree with that. You are not the referees of our political speech. That's why all three of you have to be more transparent and fair with your content moderation policies and your content selection algorithms, because at the moment it is, as I said, largely a black box. There's real mistrust among the American people about whether you're being fair or transparent. And this extends to concerns about the kinds of amplification and suppression decisions your platforms may make on Election Day and during the post-election period if the results of the election are too close to call. And so I just want to underscore again for my Democratic friends who keep using this really bad referee analogy, Google, Facebook, and Twitter are not the referees over our democracy. Now, second question, the PACT Act, which I referenced earlier, includes provisions to give users due process and an explanation when content they post is removed. So this is, again, a yes or no question. Do you agree that users should be entitled to due process and an explanation when content they post has been taken down? Mr. Zuckerberg.
Senator, I think that would be a good principle to have.
Thank you. Mr. Dorsey.
Absolutely. We believe in a fair and straightforward appeals process.
Great. Mr. Pichais?
Yes, Senator.
Terrific. Thank you. Mr. Zuckerberg, Mr. Dorsey, your platforms knowingly suppressed or limited the visibility of this New York Post article about the content on Hunter Biden's abandoned laptop. Many in the country are justifiably concerned how often the suppression of major newspaper articles occurs online. And I would say, Mr. Zuckerberg, would you commit to provide for the record a complete list of newspaper articles that Facebook suppressed or limited the distribution of over the past 5 years, along with an explanation of why each article was suppressed or the distribution was limited?
Senator, I can certainly follow up with you and your team to discuss that. This was... We have an independent fact-checking program, as you're saying. We try not to be arbiters of what is true ourselves, but we have partnered with fact-checkers around the world to help assess that, to prevent misinformation and viral hoaxes from becoming widely distributed on our platform. And I believe that the information that they fact-check and the content that they fact-check is public. So I think that there's probably already a record of this that can be reviewed.
Yeah, but if you could do that as it applies to newspapers, that would be very helpful. And Mr. Dorsey, would you commit to doing the same on behalf of Twitter?
We would absolutely be open to it. And we are suggesting going a step further, which is aligned with what you're introducing in the PACT Act, which is much more transparency around our process, the content moderation process, and also the results, the outcomes, and doing that on a regular basis. I do agree and think that builds more accountability, and ultimately that lends itself to more trust.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, very quickly, I don't have a lot of time either, but I often hear from conservative and religious Americans who look at the public statements of your companies, the geographic concentration of your companies, and the political donations of your employees, which often are in the 80 to 90% to Democrat politicians. And you can see why this lack of ideological diversity among the executives and employees of your company could be problematic and may be contributing to some of the distrust among conservatives and Republican users. And so I guess the question that I would ask is, and Mr. Zuckerberg, my understanding is that the person that's in charge of election integrity and security at Facebook is a former Joe Biden staffer. Is there someone that's closely associated with President Trump who's in the same sort of election integrity role at Facebook? And how do you all respond to that argument that there isn't sufficient balance in terms of the political ideology or diversity in your companies? And how do you deal with the lack of sort of trust that creates among conservatives?
Let's see if we can have 3 brief answers there.
Senator, I think having balance is valuable, and we try to do that. I'm not aware of the example that you say of someone in charge of this process who worked for Biden in the past. So we can follow up on that if that's right.
Follow up on the record for the rest of this answer, please, Mr. Zuckerberg. Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Dorsey.
Well, this is why I do believe it's important to have more transparency around our process and our practices. And it's independent of the viewpoints that our employees hold. We need to make sure that we're showing people that we have objective policies and enforcement.
And Mr. Pichais.
In these teams, there are people who are liberal, Republican, libertarian, and so on. We are committed. We consult widely with important third-party organizations across both sides when we develop our policies. And as a CEO, I'm committed to running it without any political bias, but happy to engage more on answer. Nancy.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, Senator Thune.
I want to read a few quotes from each of you, each of our 3 witnesses, and from your companies, and then I may ask for a response. So, Mr. Zuckerberg, this one's from you. You said, quote, "We've built Facebook to be a platform for all ideas. Our community's success depends on everyone feeling comfortable sharing what they want. It doesn't make sense for our mission or for our business to suppress political content or prevent anyone from seeing what matters most to them." You said that, I believe, on May 18th, 2016. Mr. Dorsey, on September 5th, 2018, you said, "Let me be clear about one important and foundational fact. Twitter does not use political ideology to make any decisions." Mr. Pichais, on October 28th, 2020, you said, "Let me be clear. We approach our work without political bias, full stop." Now, these quotes make me think that there is a good case to be made that you're engaging in unfair or deceptive trade practices in violation of federal law. I see these quotes where each of you tell consumers and the public about your business practices. But then you seem to do the opposite and take censorship-related actions against the president, against members of his administration, against the New York Post, the Babylon Bee, the Federalist, pro-life groups, and there are countless other examples. In fact, I think the trend is clear that you almost always censor, meaning, and when I use the word censor here, I mean block content, fact check, or label content, or demonetize websites of conservative, Republican, or pro-life individuals or groups or companies contradicting your commercial promises. But I don't see this suppression of high-profile liberal commentators. So, for example, have you ever censored a Democratic senator? How about President Obama? How about a Democratic presidential candidate? How about Planned Parenthood or NARAL or Emily's List? So, Mr. Zuckerberg, Mr. Dorsey, and Mr. Pichais, Can any of you, and let's go in that order, Zuckerberg, Dorsey, and then Pichais, can you name for me one high-profile person or entity from a liberal ideology who you have censored and what particular action you took?
Senator, I can get you a list of some more of this, but there are certainly many examples that your Democratic colleagues object to when a fact checker might label something as false that they disagree with, or they're not able to.
I get that. I get that. I just want to be clear. I'm just asking you if you can name for me one high-profile liberal person or company who you've censored. I understand that you're saying that there are complaints on both sides, but I just want one name of one person or one entity.
Senator, I need to think about it and get you more of a list, but there are certainly many issues on both sides of the aisle where people think we are making content moderation decisions that they disagree with.
I got that, and I think everybody on this call could agree that they could identify at least 5, maybe 10, maybe more high-profile conservative examples. What about you, Mr. Dorsey?
Well, we can give a more exhaustive list, but again, we don't have an understanding of political ideology of our accounts. But
I'm not asking for an exhaustive list. I'm asking for a single example. Just one individual, one entity, anyone.
We've taken action on tweets from members of the House for election misinfo.
Can you identify any example?
Yes, with two Democratic Congresspeople on election
What are their names?
misinfo. I'll get those names too.
Great. Mr. Pichais, how about you?
Senator, I'll give specific examples, but let me step back. We don't censor. We have moderation policies which we apply equally. To give you an example, on our ads.
I get that. I use the word censor as a term of art there, and I defined that term. And I don't. Again, I'm not asking for a comprehensive list. I want a name. Any name.
We have turned down ads from Priorities USA, from Vice President Biden's campaign. We have had compliance issues with World Socialist Review, which is a left-leaning publication. We can give you several examples, but for example, when we have a graphic content policy, we don't allow for ads which show graphic, violent content in those ads. And we have taken down ads on both sides of the campaign, and I gave you a couple of examples.
Okay. At least with respect to Mr. Zuckerberg and Mr. Dorsey, and I would point out that with respect to Mr. Pichais, those are not nearly as high profile. I don't know if I can identify anyone picked at random from the public, even picked at random from the public as far as members of the political active community in either political party who could identify those right off the bat. Look, there is a disparity between the censorship, and again, I'm using that as a term of art as I've defined it a moment ago, between the censorship of conservative and liberal points of view. And it's an enormous disparity. Now, you have the right, I want to be very clear about this, you have every single right to set your own terms of service and to interpret them and to make decisions about violations. But given the disparate impact of who gets censored on your platforms, it seems that you're either, one, not enforcing your terms of service equally, or alternatively, two, that you're writing your standards to target conservative viewpoints. You certainly have the right to operate your own platform, but you also have to be transparent about your actions, at least in the sense that you can't promise certain corporate behavior and then deceive customers through contradictory actions that just blatantly contradict what you've stated as your corporate business model or as your policy. So, Mr. Zuckerberg and Mr. Dorsey, if Facebook is still a platform for all ideas, and if Twitter, quote, does not use political ideology to make decisions, then do you state before this committee that, for the record, that you always apply your terms of service equally to all of your users?
Senator, our principle is to stand for free expression and to be a platform for all ideas. I certainly don't think we have any intentional examples where we're trying to enforce our policies in a way that is anything other than fair and consistent. But it's also a big company, so I get that there are probably mistakes that are made from time to time. But our North Star and what we intend to do is to be a platform for all ideas and to give everyone a voice.
Okay, I appreciate that. I understand what you're saying there about intentional examples in a big company, but again, there is a disparate impact. There is a disparate impact that's unmistakable, as evidenced by the fact that neither you nor Jack could identify a single example. Mr. Dorsey, how do you answer that question?
A brief answer, please, Mr. Dorsey.
Yes, we operate our enforcement and our policy without an understanding of political ideology. We don't. Anytime we find or examples of bias in how people operate our systems or our algorithms, we remove it. And as Mark mentioned, there are checkpoints in these companies, in these frameworks, and we do need more transparency around them and how they work. And we do need a much more straightforward and quick and efficient appeals process to give us a further checkpoint from the public.
Thank you, Senator Lee.
You have public reports that you have different chat forums in all of your companies, and also public reports where the few conservatives that might work for your companies have certainly been harassed on those types of forums. I don't expect you to have taken poll of your employees, but I just want to get a kind of a sense, because I think it's pretty obvious. But would you say that the political ideology of the employees in your company is, let's say 50-50, conservative versus liberal progressive, or do you think it's closer to 90% liberal, 10% conservative? We'll start with Mr. Dorsey.
As you mentioned, I don't know the makeup of our employees because it's not something we ask or focus on.
But just what do you think off the top of your head based on your chat rooms and kind of the people you talk to?
Not something I look for or look at.
Right. Okay, Mr. Pichais.
Senator, we have over 100,000 employees. For the past 2 years, we have hired greater than 50% of our workforce outside California. It does tend to be proportionate to the areas where we are in, but we have 1 million message boards at Google. We have groups like Republicans at, liberals at, conservatives at, and so on. And we have definitely made an effort to make sure people of all viewpoints are welcome.
So again, you want to, Mrs. Zuckerberg, will you answer the question honestly? Is it 90-10 or is it 50-50? Which is it closer to?
Senator, I don't know the exact number, but I would guess that our employee base skews left-leaning.
Thank you for that honesty. Mr. Dorsey, you started your opening comments that you think that people don't trust you. I agree with that. We don't trust you. You all say you're fair and you're consistent, you're neutral, you're unbiased. Mr. Dorsey, I think the most incredible answer I've seen so far in this hearing is when Senator Cruz asked, does Twitter have the ability to influence elections? Again, does Twitter have the ability to influence elections? You said no. Did you stick with that answer that you don't even believe? And let's face it, you all believe that Russia has the ability to influence elections or interfere by using your social platforms. Mr. Dorsey, do you still deny that you don't have the ability to influence and interfere in our elections?
My answer was around people's choice around other communication channels.
No, your answer was the question was, does Twitter have the ability to influence elections? You said no. Do you still stand by that answer?
Twitter as a company, no.
You don't think you have the ability by moderation policies, by, as Senator Lee would, and I would call it censoring, what you do with the New York Post. You don't think that censorship, that moderation of policies, you don't think that influences elections by withholding what I believe is true information from the American public? You don't think that interferes in elections?
Not our current moderation policies. Our current moderation policies are to protect the conversation and the integrity of the conversation around the elections.
Okay, for both Mr. Zuckerberg and Dorsey, who censored the New York Post stories or throttled them back, do either one of you have any evidence that the New York Post story is part of Russian disinformation, or that those emails aren't authentic? Do any of you have any information whatsoever they're not authentic or that they are Russian disinformation? Mr. Dorsey?
We don't.
You have no. So why would you censor it? Why did you prevent that from being disseminated on your platform that is supposed to be for the free expression of ideas, and particularly true ideas?
We believed it fell afoul of our hacking materials policy. We judged in the
moment. What evidence did you have that it was hacked? They weren't hacked.
We judged in a moment that it looked like it was hacked materials.
You were wrong.
Surfacing, and we updated our policy and our enforcement within 24 hours.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Zuckerman? There's Zuckerberg?
Senator, as I testified before, we relied heavily on the FBI's intelligence and alerts to us, both through their public testimony and private briefings and alerts they gave us.
Did the FBI contact you and say the New York Post story was false?
Senator, not about that story specifically.
Why did you throttle it back?
General.
Why did you throttle it back?
They alerted us to be on heightened alert around a risk of hack and leak operations around a released trove of information. And Senator, to be clear on this, we didn't censor the content. We flagged it for fact checkers to review, and pending that review, we temporarily constrained its distribution to make sure that it didn't spread wildly while it was being reviewed. But it's not up to us either to determine whether it's Russian interference nor whether it's true. We rely on the FBI and intelligence and fact checkers to do that.
Mr. Dorsey, you talked about your policies toward misinformation, and that you will block misinformation if it's against civic integrity, election interference, or voter suppression. Let me give you a tweet that was put up on Twitter. It says, Senator Ron Johnson is my neighbor and strangled our dog Buttons right in front of my 4-year-old son and 3-year-old daughter. The police refuse to investigate. This is a complete lie, but important to retweet and note that there are more of my lies to come. Now, we contacted Twitter and we asked them to take it down, and here's the response. Thanks for reaching out. We escalated this to our support team for their review, and they have determined that this is not a violation of our policies. So, Mr. Dorsey, how could a complete lie, it's admitted it's a lie, how does that not affect civic integrity? How could you view that not as being election interference? Let's face it, that could definitely impact my ability to get reelected. How could that not be a violation of voter suppression? Obviously, if people think I'm strangling my neighbor's dog, they may not show up at the polls. That would be voter suppression. So why didn't Twitter take that? By the way, that tweet was retweeted like something like 17,000 times and viewed by and loved, commented, appreciated by over 50,000 people. How is that not voter suppression? How is that not election interference? How does that not affect the civic integrity?
We'll have to look into our enforcement or non-enforcement in this case of the tweet, and we can get back to you with more context.
So, Mr. Zuckerberg, in that same June hearing, real quick, Mr. Dorsey, you referred to that June hearing with Stefan Wolfgram had all kinds of good ideas. That's 16 months ago. Why haven't you implemented any of those transparency ideas that you thought were pretty good 16 months ago?
Well, he was talking about algorithmic choice, and we have implemented one of them, which is we allow people to turn off the ranking of our timeline. The rest is work, and it's going to take some time.
Well, I'd get to it if I were you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.